Good day, everyone. So, our topic for today is multicultural perspectives in social work. Before we start to our discussion for today, let us overview first what are the importance, what are the significance of culture and peace to our profession. So, this is the final coverage of our topic in our subject. So, dapat nating maintindihan not just by the knowledge na ibibigay ko sa inyo but also uh, the, the skills, the condition na dapat nating maintindihan as a social worker. So, dito sa multicultural perspective in social work, uh, we are, because we are the agent of change, kailangan maintindihan natin kung gaano ka-importante ang culture, diversity, or gaano ka-importante na dapat nating protektahan ang culture ng ating mga kliyente. So, here in our topic, has been stated like other profession na dapat maintindihan natin uh, that they were a variety of culture here in our society. Like for example, here in General Santos City, majority here is Christian, but also to add to the other region, most of them is majority is Muslim. So kailangan natin aware tayo kung anong culture, kung anong mga dialects, kung anong mga tradition nila behind in order for us to execute properly unsang mga intervention na dapat ibibigay natin sa ating kliyente. Okay? The term multicultural perspectives, in other words, it is not only stated na to describe what is culturally diverse. It is also protecting the cultural diversity. In other words, if he or she is your client, so dapat maintindihan natin ang pagkakaiba nila. Why? It is because there is a certain intervention, mga direct intervention, hindi pwede natin ibibigay. Like for example, uh, you have a certain client walk into you. So you as social worker, you should understand, di ba, the addressing problem of the client. So dapat uh, because we have different culture, so we have a different tradition or different meaning of culture na dapat nating maintindihan. Although our discussion is they were the concept of meaning of culture. So dapat behind the concept of the culture, we have also a concept of the problem. So as a social worker, dapat maintindihan natin kung bakit natin sila tinutulungan. Because of his or her problem, because of his or her need. The thing is, kailangan maintindihan natin how important protecting the culture diversity of a certain individual in the society. Okay. Okay, next slide. What is it is? What is it? Multiculturalism is the coexistence of diverse culture where culture includes racial, religious, or cultural group is manifested in customary behavior, customary behavior, cultural assumption, and values pattern of thinking and communicative style. So as a social worker, we define this kind of perspective in our profession in order for us to understand the different culture in the same tradition, dialects, identities na ma-identify natin. Like for example, ang mga kliyente is Muslim. So, ang dialect nila is medyo hindi natin maintindihan if you are not Muslim, or if you have not yet idea kung saang meaning sa ilang mga language. So for us to understand, kailangan as a social worker, aware tayo kung anong mga tradition nila behind, kung ano ang kanilang mga pinahalagahan na mga culture, because sometimes as a social worker, binibigay lang natin yung mga intervention natin because they needed. Binibigay lang natin yung intervention natin because we are obliged to do that. We are obliged to protect the welfare uh, of individual. But also, this kind of topic, we are trying to understand between uh, the, the cultural group, and also the multicultural practices na dapat maintindihan natin. So in other words, multicultural cultural perspectives or in social work is meaning the concept here is debate between the justice of cultural group and the implication or interface between mutual practices of the individual in the society, di ba? For example, mga Ilonggo na sa dimang mga kliyente. So ang tradition nila, ang mga dialect nila is not the same in the Muslim. So dapat aware din tayo, o may mga condition tayo, may mga skills tayo na dapat ganun ang dapat natin gawin in order to help them, in order to understand their situation. Okay? Multicultural in social work. It is defined as what occur when the professional social work with a client from different cultural group, and how might affect interaction that takes place within the relationship. This define expanded to include the similarities in religion and spirituality, sexual orientation, gender, age, and maturity, social, economic class, family history, and even geographic location. Okay? So, as a social worker, um, kailangan maintindihan natin ang different culture ng isang kliyente. For example, napapabilang siya sa Region 12. So, mostly here in Region 12, were Muslim. But also, they were also Christian here. So, dapat maintindihan natin ang different custom, traditions, identities na ginagamit nila in order for us to execute appropriately unsa ang mga intervention na gagamitin natin during our work or client relationship. So dito, this is defined, expanded to include the similarities in region and spirituality, sexual orientation, gender, age, and maturity, social, economic class, family history, and even geographic location. So for example, you are a social worker conducting a community organization. So in that certain community, there are different religion, different tribes na napapabilang. So in order to disseminate the information, kailangan natin ng knowledge how to uh, disseminate the information basis on their gender, basis on their age, basis on their social economic class, or basis even the geographic location. What are the prerequisites? So we have, I guess, siya kabuok na condition. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have four prerequisite. In other words, skill ito ng social worker when he or she having a activities or intervention sa iyang kliyente. The first one is identifying cultural difference. One of the first steps in working with the clients is to discuss what brings a person into intervention and to identify the presenting problem. The typical Western style of finding answer through a direct approach is not compatible with many culture. Okay, for example, because you are the social worker, we have a certain na mga helping steps na pinahalagan, di ba? Like assessment, we should first come up for the assessment. But before you can up to assessment, kailangan ma-identify natin what are the problem for work, what are the presenting problem. So in order to get the information of the client, so kailangan ma-identify natin what are the various problem or what are the concept of the problem na dapat nating maintindihan with that kind of situation. So here in our first prerequisite, like identifying cultural diversity, it is trying to understand us na during our first step of intervention or getting the information of the client, kailangan maintindihan din natin kung anong culture, kung anong religion sila. Why? It is because sometimes Muslim sila, so habang nagsasalita ka sa kanila ng Bisaya, hindi pala nila maintindihan kasi their dialects, their language is para lang yung same sa kanilang uh, culture. Like for example, habang nagsasalita ka ng Bisaya, so kadalasan hindi naintindihan ng mga Muslim ang dialect na Bisaya, di ba? So nagtatagalog tayo. So they are comfortable sa ganyang dialects na pagsasalita. So as a social worker, typically the direct intervention is not compatible with many culture. So in other words, sometimes hindi lang binibigyan lang natin sila ng mga financial assistance, hindi lang nagpo-provide tayo uh, sa mga needs, mga basic needs nila. So sometimes ang mga approach na mga uh, pwede sa mga ganitong instances is yung maka-interact tayo, we have interaction between the client na maintindihan natin kung ano ang difficulty behind the problem. Okay? The next one is understanding and addressing issues. One of the most effective tools can utilize to engage the client from other culture are openly acknowledge any differences. The key is doing it in such a way does not undermine the client belief that you will be able to offer professional help and potential solution. Okay? So understanding and addressing the issues. One of the tool of social worker is communication, di ba? So in order to communicate openly, to acknowledge the differences between the culture, under under multicultural practices as individual society. So kailangan may mga seminar tayo, may mga knowledge tayo about their religion, about their tribes, about their tradition, their dialects, their identities behind to utilize or to engage with our client. So, the key is doing it in such a way does not undermine the client belief. So, dito, we are trying to understand na every client has a different culture, different tradition, different attitude behind, di ba? So, in order to offer the professional help na sinasabi natin, in order to come up the potential or the potential of a certain client for solution, so dapat maintindihan natin their different tradition, different culture behind before we can up to our intervention. What? Okay. Another prerequisite, the role of self in multicultural. Self-reflection is a vital to becoming a cultural competent social worker. Start by identifying your own worldview and personal belief about those who are different from you. So this exercise will assist you in uncovering your own prejudice, feelings, stereotypical ideas about the clients from other culture. Okay? So as a social worker in perspective, multicultural perspective, one of the goal here is self-reflection or self-realization. In other words, you as a social worker uh, to enable to understand the problem of a certain clients, dapat malaman natin, maintindihan natin kung ano ang kanilang potential behind. So, because we are different, we have differences, we have different approach to a certain person, kailangan ma-assist natin yung mga prejudice nila, yung feelings nila about from about client from other culture. So in other words, we are helping the client here for their maximum potential capacity as an individual. So self-reflection is an other activity of a social worker na dapat maintindihan natin in order to use it during our intervention with our client. Ongoing education, other prerequisite is ongoing education required in multicultural. It is important to understand that professional social worker never master the ability to understand every unique differences. This is a continual state of learning. Your knowledge base will grow as you work with greater number of diverse clients, but learning doesn't stop here. Okay, so for as a social worker, dili man jud nato ma-master paano nato ma-understand ang ilang cultural differences or unsa to lang mga cultural diversity na pinahalagahan. But it is uh, help us to understand a lot what are the importance of protecting the culture of every individual in the society. In other words, uh, it has been stated na dapat maintindihan natin na as a social worker, as a future social worker, because we are knowledgeable for our in our profession, dapat knowledgeable din tayo how can we use our tool or how can we communicate with other people, with other clients as a different culture behind. Okay? In multicultural perspective, we should become aware of our biases and values. So as a social worker in multicultural perspective, in order to be aware on our mistakes, in our value na ibibigay natin sa ating kliyente, here in multicultural perspective, it has been stated the interface between the practices and the practices of as a social worker na dapat na maintindihan or and also the culture of a certain client in order for us to eliminate or eradicate some problem na uh, mangyayari sa isang sitwasyon. Become aware of our own cultural norms and expectation. So, as a social worker, maging aware din tayo kung ano po yung mga variety of intervention on how can we engage with our client from other culture in order to acknowledge the differences of their tradition, their religion behind. So attempt to understand the world from our client's vantage point, gain a knowledge of the dynamic of oppression, racism, discrimination, and stereotyping. So, as a social worker, maging aware din tayo na every individual has a unique personality. So, every client vantage point is may mga dynamics tayo na activity na dapat maintindihan natin in order to eliminate some discrimination or stereotyping within ourselves but also the client. Okay, the study the historical background, tradition, value of our client. Okay, here in multicultural perspective, maintindihan din natin kung anong background ng ating kliyente, kung anong kaimportante na maintindihan natin ang kanilang style to answer their to answer their presenting problem behind, di ba? So most of the effective tool here is communication. Why? As a social worker, kailangan magaling tayong mag-socialize with our client. Why? It is because it is also our technique to get the information or to get the maximum resources or information na dapat maintindihan natin before we can up to assessment. Be open to learning from your client. So, here in multicultural perspective, hindi lang maintindihan mo or makaka-learn ka ng mga practices behind our profession but also maintindihan din natin yung culture ng isang kliyente, kung ano ang kanilang mga tradition behind. So sometimes their situation is connected to their culture. So di natin ma-execute ng tama ang mga professional help na dapat ibibigay natin to come up to potential solution if we don't have idea how can we what are the condition of their skill, what are the condition of their knowledge or their culture behind. Challenge yourself to expand your vantage point to explore your client ways of life that are different from you. So, multiple perspective, we are openly to understand the personal belief, the difference between you and your social worker, in order for you as a social worker to assist the feeling of prejudice or stereotyping. between from other culture. Develop an awareness of acculturation strategy. So here in multicultural perspective, as a social worker, to communicate properly, to communicate correctly to our client, kailangan we have a great idea or great understanding about the cultural diversity of our client na dapat ma-learn natin in order for us to protect them, in order for us to receive special attention at the same time. Why it is because especially of our client is we can help them through to communicate. We can help them to understand their situation. So before we uh, help them, kailangan maintindihan natin, kailangan ma-explore natin kung ano yung mga different culture, kung ano yung mga debate about between the cultural groups and also their practices or multi practices. In other words, for example, you are employ your internship in a community. So as a social worker, you have a set of expectation na dapat ibibigay mo ang mga intervention to them. But they have different gender, different age, different culture na nandun. So dapat i-separate mo, dapat uh, naka naka-centralize na yung intervention na dapat ang gagamitin na intervention sa mga bata is dapat inline din sa kanilang practices as a bata. Dapat kung ibibigay mo na intervention para sa mga women, dapat inline din sa kanilang need as a woman. Diba? Okay? So that's all our topic for today. If you have question about multicultural perspective in social work, kailangan isa-isip lang natin kung gaano importante to understand or to describe the culture of every individual of the society, and also how can we protect the welfare of individual from other culture. Okay? Okay, thank you so much, class, for understanding this kind of topic. See you on the next level of life. Char. Ito, class. Thank you so much sa tanan, because na-survive na to ang Decem. So, unta. Next sem, magsabay gyapon ta. Char. Kung makagwanta pa. Okay? Thank you.